Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this Basic Energy Sciences Early Career Network webinar. We're going to be focusing on career skills that are developed outside of the lab. So today we have four great scientists who are esteemed researchers, but also have very well-established careers outside of the lab. First off, I'd like to just recognize the organizing committee that were involved in making this webinar possibility. Rishu, An, Matt, Ruby, Hao, and myself. And of course, Robin Hayes, our DOE representative, who helped us organize this as well. Start off, I would like to introduce Dr. Aurora Clark, Dr. Neri Govind, Dr. David Keeney, and Dr. Miragani Gotecha. And just to start, I think the best way for everyone to kind of understand where our panelists are coming from, I think all of our panelists, please, if you could, introduce yourself and give a brief roadmap of your career ending where you are now. We'll go alphabetically. Dr. Clark, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
Yeah, of course. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. My name is Aurora Clark, and I'm from the University of Utah. I got my undergraduate degree at Central Washington University, which is a relatively small, primarily teaching school. And then I got my Ph.D. From Indiana University in 2003. And then I postdoced at Los Alamos National Lab. And then at Los Alamos, I really struggled with whether or not I wanted to go on and continue working in a national lab for my career or move into academia. And so I was pretty diverse in my job application kind of constructs after that point in time. But I ended up settling on Washington State University, which is where I began my career. And I was there for 17 years. And then I moved to the University of Utah about 2 years ago now. So there.
Awesome, thank you, Dr. Clark. Dr. Govind?
Thanks, Caroline, and thanks to the organizing committee for reaching out. I'm happy to be here and discuss my career so far. My name is Neri Govind. I got my PhD in physics at McGill University. And then I moved to UCLA. Actually, I had a change in plans in a way, went to theoretical chemistry and worked with Emily Carter, in fact, and learned a lot of chemistry, bringing in a physics background. And then I spent a few years there. And as Aurora was saying earlier, you come to a juncture and you're trying to figure out what you should do next, and whether it was going to be academia, whether it was industry, whether it was a national lab, and so on. But I did find an opportunity at a company called Axelrus in San Diego soon after my postdoc, which is currently called BOE. And it fitted my skill set that I was actually working on with in the Carter Group. And I spent a few years there. In fact, I went to industry, and it was actually a very fruitful experience, working on, I was actually working on electronic structure theories there. And it was actually quite fruitful, and I made a lot of mentors, and I met a lot of people that gave me good guidance. And then it came to a point where I wanted to start looking at something on my own, basically starting to look at independent. I wanted to do my own independent research because industry has its own requirements. So I decided to start looking at academia as well as national labs at that point after a few years in industry, and sort of trying to bring in some of those aspects over to my research career. And so I was fortunate enough to find a staff position at the Pacific Northwest National Lab in Southeast Washington State. And this is where I've been actually since 2007. So yeah, it's a brief overview of where I am. Can't hear you.
Oh, am I next? Okay, sorry. Yes. Well, thank you for Caroline, and also the organizing committee for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here as well. So my background is in condensed matter physics and materials physics, and starting from my Ph.D. at Johns Hopkins and a postdoc at Argonne National Lab, and then a brief stint at University of Arizona. I was working on magnetic materials and from the standpoint of growing materials and thin films and devices and that sort of thing. In 2001, I came back to Argonne National Lab. We're still working on magnetic materials in that same sort of area, but with using the national user facilities, and whereas I was a beamline scientist at the Advanced Photon Source. So not growing materials anymore, but on the characterization side and working with people who grow them and designing their experiments and helping them and collaborating with them, of course. And that was very that was very enjoyable and productive. I learned a lot, and I met a lot of great scientists that way, of course, because they come through to use the facilities. I did get to a point where I was feeling like I was doing the same thing for a long time, and I wanted to branch out. And at the same time, I was becoming interested in government and policy, and I learned about the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships run by the American Association for Advancement of Science, which bring scientists into the government for 1 to 2 years as a fellow, and to learn policy and learn how government works as well, and also to advise in the government. So I did that. I applied for that and was awarded it, and then I spent 2 years in the State Department in that fellowship, doing things that were completely different from what I had done before, and it was a completely different environment, and that was an interesting experience. And sort of taught me a lot about communications and that sort of thing. From there, I came back to DOE, first in the advanced manufacturing office, working again on things that I was not an expert on, but and then 2 years ago, I moved over to BES, where I'm now the program manager for the X-ray light sources, the 5 X-ray light sources run by DOE, which include the Advanced Photon Source at Argonne, where I used to work, and 4 others. So that's how I got here. So thank you.
I guess I'm next. So thank you, organizing committee, and thanks for invitation. And I think I have the most unusual journey in a sense. So my degree is in physics, and currently I'm running this company, O2M Technologies. And how I got there, it's a long and interesting journey. So I had all my education in India. I had, after my master's, I got the tenured faculty position, teaching intensive, and I taught physics, electronics, computer science, you just name it. It was beginning of that era. And I did PhD while working full time as a faculty, and then I got a fellowship from Government of India to go to IISc. And from there, I realized, and I was also teaching for a while and got completely bored teaching various topics. This challenge was over. So from there, I went to Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, physics to chemistry, chemical physics. Then I spent 3 years in Germany as a staff scientist in University of Duisburg, also in physical chemistry department. And in 2006, we moved to US, and I first spent a couple years in chemistry department, but it was when I moved from NMR to MRI to imaging, that's where bioengineering, that's where I found that's my niche, and that's where I can contribute to the field. And spend some time doing tissue engineering, by imaging, medical imaging, MRI. And then this incredible opportunity came to start this company, the technology, this EPR, based on the EPR, many of you know, electron paramagnetic resonance. the imaging part of that, which works at the low field, the technology was mature enough, and we had our founder team we had all different skill sets. So we decide to move this push forward from lab to the outside where it can have a real impact. Because when we work on a project in our lab, we can publish, but the impact comes when you bring it out to give it to the other labs and where it can be used. So we've been doing this a few years now. My job profile has changed. A lot of time goes into raising money and spreading the word, but it's extremely challenging, but it's also fun. So I have always been driven by challenge because I had the tenured position and I could still work there until I retire. But I like taking the next challenge and see where we can go. So it's kind of fun.
Awesome. Oh, that's really cool. Thank you. And to start off the questions, I think a real general question that I think everyone would want to hear is because our focus of this webinar is being skills outside of research in the lab, what role do soft skills, such as, for example, communication and teamwork, play in your current role? And how do you think PhD graduates can work towards strengthening those skills? Dr. Clark, I think we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think soft skills are incredibly important and often underappreciated during the PhD journey. And I think that, those skills encompass not only like speaking skills and communication skills, but I would also say things that maybe are a bit more nuanced, like personnel management and trying to understand, teamwork. Teamwork is certainly part of that. But mentorship is also a significant portion of that as well. And so I think that mentorship and really thinking about how to help support my team, so the people in my research group, to grow as scientists and to grow also in an emotional context as well, because I think that I'm sure many of you who are getting your PhD right now can kind of reflect back on maybe like the starting point of your PhD to wherever you are now and seeing really how much you've changed as a person. And I think getting your PhD is a really transformative time in your life that way. And so, in my current role, I see that occur amongst all of the members of my group. And so it really becomes how to help those people in my group to grow, to kind of fulfill all of their potential, both intellectually, scientifically, as well as emotionally, because it is such a transformative time. And so I think that mentorship and having the opportunity to mentor students, junior colleagues in your group is really huge. I also think that, going out of your way to try and understand how best to teach, your peers in your lab, the things that you know and how to learn from them effectively is also huge. And so those are, I think, probably some of the most important elements that I experience now in my current job as a faculty member.
Oh, awesome. Great answer. Dr. Govind, do you have anything to add?
I think I resonate with everything Aurora just said. And one thing I would say is that thing that has been very transformative for me is to try to surround yourself with as many mentors as you can and, be a sponge, ask many questions, see where their life experiences have taken them. And there are lots of people that are actually willing to give you that advice. And so ask questions, and a lot of these questions are not really framed in a specific way, but you can learn from interactions with them and your collaborations with people. It could be even a postdoc or even a senior graduate student in your own group and so on. And so everybody's going through a different experience, right? In the PhD, it's a challenging time. And so I would say I would just add to that, because in a national lab, that's almost required, because you're in this. I mean, we'll come to that question probably later, but yeah, those are the only things I can say, actually, in addition to what Aurora already nicely put. Yeah.
Nicely put. Dr. Keaveney?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said so far, especially, and I'll point out also in terms of looking for more mentors or being a sponge and a lot of people I think are afraid to approach people maybe but don't be, because like actually, in my experience, most people are they like to talk about what they do, and so I think some advice would be reach out to people who are in positions where you want to learn something about that, and you'll most likely get a positive response.
Do you have any, oh, sorry to interrupt you. Do you have any examples of someone reaching out to you?
Well, it happens. Yeah. I mean, people do, like, well, since I've been in this role, I do get people from the labs reaching out to me all the time to ask questions about, well, not just, I mean, about like funding opportunities and things like that, of course, but also about my career journeys and how I got the fellowship, and how I got where I am. So it definitely has happened. Yeah, mostly from the labs, because that's who I interact with the most. In terms of soft skills, I'll also say that within the government anyway, I mean, obviously it's very important. One thing I was struck with when I arrived at the State Department, and it's true of most of the government, I think, and nobody does anything on their own. Everything is cleared by like all kinds of people, and everybody has equities, as we say, and you need to have the ability to sort of work with these people and make sure that you're not just going off on your own and getting people mad at you. So, or doing something that you're like, they may have information that you're unaware of. It's very important, obviously. So, so you have to, the important thing is to recognize that the importance of that working collaboratively is critical,
Absolutely. Great points. Dr. Kotecha, do you have any insights?
Okay, so I'll complement all of that, because I'm running a company, and in my opinion, yes, communication, curiosity, that's what I need for people who work in our company, because everything we're doing is new, which has not been done before, breaking the boundaries. So as long as you're interested, curious, ready to learn, have good communication skill, you're very, very valuable for us. Having writing skills, having coding, anything, almost all you do in PhD is translatable to industry. So I think what my advice will be, okay, know your strength, play on your strength, and know your weakness, reach out, see if you can overcome it. And some weakness are inherent, some like, okay, I don't like this, so it's okay. There are other things which you like and you can do. So I think attitude is the best kind of skill, which I'm ready to learn, I'm ready to give myself. And after that, everything works out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A great way to summarize what all the previous panelists had said too, Dr. Kotecha. The following questions, I'm going to direct them to individual panelists, because the committee and I have seen that, or feel like it would best be directed towards them. But please, after they finish speaking, if you want to chime in after I've directed the question to somebody, please do. You all can give great feedback on all these questions. So my next question is actually directed to Dr. Govind. And so as research becomes more and more interdisciplinary, collaborations, both big and small, are at the frontier of new research and new science. And so could you spend a few moments discussing the importance of collaboration in your research and how you personally facilitate those collaborations?
Right. So I'll take one step back, if that's okay. For example, being at a national lab, there is this thing about being introduced to a national lab. So you're somewhere else. And sometimes I wasn't at a national lab and I came to the national lab. So the first thing that hits you is the large science and the number of teams that are involved. And then you try to find your spot first. And that can take a little while. I mean, you're alone. Before you start forming collaborations, you dig into a project and you work on it. And that's not very different from what you've experienced in academia, or even in the small company that I was working at. But then you're in the sea right now with a lot of people, and you have to try and nuance things. And so, yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. So collaboration is huge. Like, to answer that question, I can't say it any other way, because almost all the projects traverse boundary lines in the national lab. I mean, especially if you work, I mean, I'm a theoretician, so we work with theoreticians across projects. You try to listen to people. They might have complementary ideas that you can bring to your own projects. They might have different funding streams, but there may be common thoughts that you might synergize with. So collaboration is big. And what I do from my standpoint is we try to have little journal club-like things, for example, where people can actually synergize ideas, different groups can talk to each other. And we try to do it as a group because we try to be at least, I mean, some groups do it more than the other groups, but we try to facilitate that to see if we can actually bring on ideas from other groups that might enhance our projects and vice versa. And then I also do a lot of work on mentoring junior staff. And I think because again, this going back to the first question, when you come into a national lab, before you even think of collaboration, you're trying to find your spot. So I think there's a lot of younger staff scientists that are actually looking for mentoring, and you try to bring them on to a project step at a time, and you give them valuable advice. And I think you have to go as a senior mentor and trying to give back. You have to go a little extra, and basically some people may not need it as much. Some people need it a lot. But I think everybody basically reciprocates. I mean, they absorb this information because everybody wants to stay and everybody wants to do something, right? And so at the end of the day, being a mentor, that actually benefited me in a way because they end up becoming my collaborators at the end of the day. So that's fantastic for me because, so that's one of the few things I do here. Other than that, we try to give talks. We try to attend each other's talks, like I was saying, journal clubs, but even small seminars that are around. You never know what comes up. So yeah, I leave it at that, and maybe others can fill in. So yeah.
Of course, thank you. Great insight. Everyone in this panel has collaboration experience. So anyone else would like to speak?
Yeah, I can talk about our collaboration because I collaborate widely. We have one set of skills, but we also need application of technology to various fields. So I collaborate with neurology, with cancer, with tissue engineering, regenerative medicine, type 1 diabetes, and deep learning, and chemistry, and like just you name it. So it's very, very important for modern science because we all can bring something, but we also have to collaborate with other groups and people, and then that's how the science move forwards. The skill wise, I think we have to learn, listen, see what we can each contribute to the collaboration for the maximum outcome. That's what is important in my opinion.
I guess I'd also just say that there's lots of different types of collaboration, right? And that can take on lots of meanings. It can mean that, you have two groups of people with complementary expertise and they're both fully engaged and really like it's a shared intellectual project versus collaborations where maybe, you're contributing a small component in a much larger kind of effort. And so I think that it's important to kind of think about the types of collaborations that you personally would get gratification from, right? Some people really like seeing how their specific expertise can impact a really large project. Some people really like to be fully engaged and understand everything about a project. And so thinking a little bit about the criterion that you kind of get fulfillment from in a collaboration is, I think, important.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. I think since Dr. Clark, you just finished speaking, I'm going to direct a question back to you. And then, so academia is the major environment that a lot of new PhD graduate students are exposed to. Were there any opportunities outside of academic settings that you learned that you were able to bring back your knowledge into your academic role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when I graduated and got my PhD, in all honesty, I didn't necessarily really want to continue in academia. And so this was a major motivation for me to go to a national lab for my postdoc. And my postdoc was a really fantastic experience. I'm a theoretical chemist like Neri, and it was really amazing to be in an environment in a national lab that was filled, like you had an entire team filled with computational and theoretical people. And that's a very unique kind of scenario that doesn't happen in academia very often. I think that one of the biggest things that did for me is being able to step out of a situation, step out of academia and kind of experience something new. It gives you the opportunity to realize what you like and don't like, right? About a working environment, about an academic scenario. And the same thing is also true at a national lab, right? I mean, I think the biggest lesson in being able to try and do postdocs or internships or, collaborative kind of things that allow you to go and experience other environments is that it really shows you that there's lots and lots of different ways to do fantastic science. And so it's really not so much about, it's not so much about the specifics of the science, it's about how you want to do science, right? And the kind of scientist you want to be, right? How do you want to contribute to the scientific enterprise? And so, I think that when you go through and have these other experiences, you can kind of try to identify that for yourself. And then that gives you the ability to say, okay, yes, I want to go back into academia, which is what I ended up doing. But with a much better mindset, having stepped out and seen kind of a little bit about the things I liked and didn't like. But I loved being in a national lab too. And so I maintained lots of collaborations, and many of my students have gone on to national labs. And so I do think trying to experience as many different environments as possible is very, very useful.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to add? It can be for your specific field.
I can chime in a little bit. So I've got this unusual experience of going to industry and then coming to a national lab. So the way I've seen it, and this is the advice I give people, and I think it's very similar to what Aurora says, because you can do good science anywhere. It's just the requirements are different, they're slightly different, but the way you go about doing science and the way you break down a problem is almost always the same. And the one thing I noticed was, of course, in industry, right? The way I see a national lab and an industry, I think they're very similar. I mean, and I think even academia is similar. There's a project that's been given to you. There might be a time span. I just look at the whole thing in terms of time scales. So in this industry, for example, you might have to deliver on a product or a specific module in a specific period of time because it's a release cycle. Whereas you have a project that you might have to do in a national lab or in an academia, which comes up every 3 years, but you still have to put out papers and do good work on it. Whether it's the release of software and a product or versus doing actual foundational research and publishing papers, they're all very, very similar in that sense, right? So you can learn these things from different environments. And if I could say, right, if you put everything on timescales, they all start making sense. So that's the only thing I can add to what Aurora was saying earlier. Actually, I think just every experience is good. It's all about like what Dr. Cortejo was saying earlier, right? It's about the attitude, about getting into a problem and looking at it, breaking it down. It's a mystery, the curiosity part of it, and have fun. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Cortejo.
I just wanted to say, yeah, that's true. In the end, you want to have a productive, intellectually productive and interesting work. And it can come from anywhere, industry, academia, national lab. As long as you see that you are contributing meaningfully, it brings satisfaction, and that's what is most important.
Well said. Well said. Moving to you, Dr. Keaveney. Your sound for me, everyone else could hear you, but I couldn't hear all of your introduction. So you might have covered some of this already, but I have a question for you.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's all right. It was my fault. As many PhD graduates know and interact with like scientific policy, but not a lot of people get to meet people in your role who do work developing that policy and developing collaboration on a national scale. Could you take a moment and share how the pace and nature of your work in government differs from your previous research settings?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's many ways, and I think I touched on one already, where in an answer to the previous question, where the importance of collaboration and how within the government, like nobody does anything on their own. When I came to the State Department as a fellow, I was the only scientist in the entire bureau of about 90 people. And so that was a very different environment from what I came from, the national lab. And I found, and most of the people there were economists and political science people. And I found a good way to put it is that most scientists in academia, national labs, and maybe industry to some extent are a lot of them are sort of a mile deep and an inch wide, right? Whereas the people in the government and these economists, they're a mile wide and an inch deep. And I found it necessary to go in between, kind of try to go in between that and be, not the extreme either way. So there's a necessity and an opportunity to work outside your field of expertise and learn things that are not what you usually do, and actually you can recognize that you actually can contribute there, even though you may not have formal training in that area. And the reason for that, of course, is PhD scientists are trained to solve problems, and they know how to evaluate evidence. They know how to understand what is important about a problem and what is maybe not, right? So that's certainly one area. The more practically, I think, as I mentioned, I was feeling fairly narrowly focused when I was at the lab, and as a result, now I work very differently, across a lot of different disciplines, and I have a broader view of how the labs work and how the facilities work and everything, but I don't know the details of any particular beamline or most of the beamlines at a particular facility. There's almost 200. There's 200 of them, so I can't. But it's very enjoyable to me anyway to see things from a different perspective and sort of understand how they work a little bit more broadly, I guess you could say. I don't know. Yeah, I think I maybe missed part of your question, but if I did, let me know. You can ask it again. But
I think you did a good job kind of explaining what you were doing. I really liked what you said about, some research is about a mile deep and an inch wide and working policies, vice versa. And that actually leads into a question. So I'm going to direct it back to you. Sorry to put you on the spot, but how can a researcher stay agile so that someday if they do need to move and switch, the type of breadth of research or breadth of knowledge that they need to be able to do, how do they stay agile so that they are not limited to their research niche? And I'm sure that every panelist could also add on to this after as well.
Well, yeah, so I don't know if I have a good answer to that, except that, so as I mentioned before, I was feeling really narrowly focused, and I actually felt like I was stuck in, like, this is all I can do. Like, I can be a beamline scientist for the rest of my career, and I don't know how to do anything else. And the best way to remain agile is to realize that that's never true. Actually, it's that, like, you're never stuck in what you're doing. Like, you have skills that are so broadly applicable to all kinds of different problems, and that was what I kind of learned in the fellowship. I think a lot of people actually understand that better than I did at the time, but but in terms of like what people can do, I'm going to say, I mean, one skill that I really, I think I had a little bit before, but I really learned in the fellowship quite a bit was communications and understanding how who your audience is and what they need to know and what they don't need to know, and being able to communicate that. I mean, I think that helped me move out of the sort of the lab environment into where I am now. So yeah, I think probably other people have different experiences with that maybe. So
Thank you.
I can chime in a little bit how to stay agile. I think read widely, broadly. You're reading literature in your topic, but also be aware what else is going on in different fields, different world. And that's where when you need to switch from one to another field, you will have at least idea what that field's requirement is and what you can bring from your own experience. So reading and being aware of what else is going on in the world is very important.
I can add to that if you don't mind, Caroline.
Go for it.
So one thing I would say in line with what Dava and Vignani was saying, I mean, I would say, right, a PhD experience is already a hard experience. You've already toughed it out and done some tough problems. You've thought through a problem. There's never an easy, if somebody says I can switch easily to another thing, it's not generally true. There's always a learning period. And it's always that way. But I would say believe in yourself. The most important thing is because you've already done something really hard to come to that spot. And you know how to break a problem apart. Everything, whether it's widely, like you said, agile, moving across it, you just have to bring it back to a PhD project, for example, map it onto something you looked at earlier and said, okay, you know what, this is another problem that I looked at while it was a different kind of problem. So you start using your PhD skills in the scientific method and start breaking it down again. And then you suddenly start embracing everything. So that's my 2 cents to that. Yeah. And it's helped me a bit as well. So.
yeah, actually, if I could just add, I don't mean to imply that career pivots, especially mid-career pivots, are easy necessarily. So they are, there is a lot that goes into them, of course, but
I will say they are fun.
yes.
Because otherwise we can get into one path. At least it's fun sometimes to switch and see different side, different problems. It keeps things exciting and interesting.
Believing in yourself, like Miri said, I think is incredibly important, right? Because you have to be pretty brave to like jump into new things. And in some ways, that's kind of part of what you should learn during your PhD is to be brave in your learning. And that never changes, right? No matter what stage you are in your career. And I think that that's an important message and never stops.
Well said, everyone. Wow. You need to take more notes. Dr. Kotecha, I have a question about industry, and as someone who employs a lot of PhD graduates, what skills and experiences do employers look for whenever they're in your position looking to expand their company or to bring on new talent?
So we are a small company, so my experiences or whatever I look for may not true for the large industry or big pharma or big companies, big energy companies. What I look for when we're looking for people, again, as I said, curiosity, attitude, and technical skills. If it's a technical job, we definitely need to have the basic technical skills. Many of the skills are translatable, as I said, writing, coding, chemistry skill, engineering skill, but mostly I look for, are you ready to learn? Because we also provide training. If you don't have skill, we have a senior people in the company who can train people. So in my opinion, I look soft skill, as you said, that interested to learn, interested to contribute, and then you bringing something on the table. So together that makes a wonderful kind of So you get something, you doing something new, what you have not done before. We provide something, and then we creating something different or new. So it has to be fun from both sides, and then it creates wonderful world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Let's see. I think my next question is directed, well, Dr. Clark, if you wouldn't mind starting off this question, I'm sure there's other people who could also speak to this. But as new scientists in the field, the ability to share our work with the public is key. It's like a key success metric. What is your advice on publishing during and after PhDs to improve academic career prospects?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, publishing is the primary way that people can have confidence in your technical skills and in your ability to solve problems, right? And so in addition to the scientific impact that a paper has, when I read, someone's paper, it tells me a lot about, maybe their skills in writing and communication. It tells me about what their technical knowledge is. And you can tell a lot about what a person cares about in the sense of what they put into a paper, right? How deeply they describe something, how clearly they describe something. And so you can learn a lot that way. So I think that, one of the biggest things that I think is underappreciated during your PhD, but is getting more traction is really, I would say that a key criterion of being, of the scientific enterprise is being a good writer. It's not only just the oral communication skills, which are important, but being a good writer kind of trumps that in some sense in that you need to be able to write proposals, right? To fund your research, right? You need to be able to write reports, right? You need to be able to technically communicate details that you're not going to in an oral presentation. And so I think really working hard on writing skills manifests and helps you in many, many, many different ways. I would also say that in the communication with the public aspect, right, that means that you need to be able to communicate with people on different levels. It's not just the technical stuff, it's also how you get people to care about your work and understand and appreciate the importance of your work, both in an oral communication as well as in written communication. The other thing that you can do that I recommend a lot for students is to have other products, if you will, that demonstrate kind of your leadership and your caring and contributions to the community, right? So like if you do software, this could mean maybe you have open GitHub or GitLab repositories that are well documented, that where you're teaching people, hey, I wrote a intro to Python, or hey, I've got my code that's associated with this publication and it's well documented, right? And so I think that there's a lot of ways to do that, and to communicate both with scientists who might not be in your domain, as well as with the public in general. I have been part of an EFRC for a really long time, and I had multiple students who went around and were contributed to the newsletter, the early career newsletter, and that was a great experience for them. So I think looking for opportunities that way can help you not only in the writing skills, but also in the soft skills as well.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I mean, I agree with, that's a perfect answer, but because I agree with the importance of communicating and not only in academic publications, but other products as well. Publication is changing, what the way journals look and and it's going to keep changing. I don't know if we're going to recognize it in 10 years, right? So being aware of those changes and taking advantage of other opportunities to communicate your science is very, very important. And fortunately, the younger generation is better at this than we are. So they seem to understand the importance of communication better than a lot of people my age anyway. So but not forgetting or not being aware that you should explain why your work is important is very important, is very critical. And I still, there's still a lot out there where people don't do that so much. So not just in papers, but in oral presentations and things like that. and proposals. I mean, if even a proposal, you know, when you're writing you're responding to a funding opportunity, your reviewers don't necessarily come from your exact background. They need to understand why it's important and what you're really doing. And so I just, yeah, I thank you for that answer, Aura.
Dr. Kotecha, I just want to extend the question to you a little bit, just because in industry, that process is very different, communicating with the public. Do you have any comments about how that type of question translates to your field?
So as a small company, we also publish a lot because everything we do innovation, we try to get IP if it is patentable, and then we disseminate to public via publication. But we also, since it's a new field, I spend a lot of time in educating. So all my teaching experiences, like I have been giving a lot of presentations, lot of we do exhibit where we educate people what it's about and where it can be used. So we send newsletters. So yes, communication, so at every level. So there is a scientific publication which has to have the scientific rigor, but then we can simplify our what we did into very, very few sentences, which can go into newsletter, which can go to the broader audience, which may not have the background what we have, and they should still understand, oh, this is important, this is interesting. So it's very, very important to have communicate at various levels. And yeah, we do it a lot as a small industry, small company.
Do you think it changes any when it comes to investment in your company?
I have not been looking for investment yet.
Okay.
So we are not at the stage to look for investment.
Yes.
So yeah, I communicate to reviewers of our grant proposal. So it comes to the same
I see.
fundraising, because reviewers have to understand what you're doing and why it's important. So
I see. Dr. Govind.
So if I can chime in to Dr. Kotecha's answer, and I'm pretty sure she'd agree with me on this. So when my experience in industry, right, I was wearing two hats. You know, sometimes in a smaller company,
yes.
you have to be in research and development, and you might have to accompany a product manager to a client site. And who better than the scientists who actually develop that piece of software to actually explain to the person who's eventually going to pay money for it that this is actually done in a specific way. And it resonates a lot if you're passionate about that, because it's your piece of work that's gone into your software developments and whatever you have developed. You know, it's going to earn money for the company at the end of the day, but the client sees that. And that's very infectious, in fact. So I would say, right, you know, that's really important. It benefited me a lot, in fact, because that's coming from industry, right? So the industry can teach you a lot of those things. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is to earn revenue for the company. But in academia or in a national lab, it's proposals. So it's like going back to my analogy earlier, it's very, very similar in that sense. So
Yes.
yeah, right, so.
Yeah, basic keys are the same, and multitasking, and it gives a lot of satisfaction because you see the real impact your technology development is having, and answering questions. So it's fun. As long as you have fun, you enjoy what you're doing, you will be able to communicate it. And again, I come back to the basics, read a lot, because reading a lot gives you communication ability, because people who have not read, their communication skills will also be limited. So just read broadly, read widely, not only science, but non-fiction, fiction, whatever.
Great answer. All of you, actually. Thank you. Thank you. We are getting close to the end of our time in this webinar, so I want to give everybody a chance to have some final takeaways and comments. Us kind of starting around this question of, as a final takeaway, what advice would you give to current PhD students and new graduates who are uncertain about their career options? Dr. Clark, if you'd like to kick us off.
So I guess, I mean, this is really hard and everyone I think goes through this experience, right, of kind of not figuring out or not knowing really what they want to do. And I think that it kind of comes down to really doing a lot of self-assessment associated with the things that you get gratification from and the things that you can and cannot like live without in the context of your work environment, right? And so for me, I really loved working at a national lab, but I realized that I really missed interacting with students and that I wanted that to be a real critical component of my job. And so that then led me to pivot back to academia, you know what I mean? And some people, I think everyone's different and like, and the science, Neri and Dr. Koteche, everybody has commented on how you can do good science lots of places, right? So then the decision-making factors are these other aspects about what you will get gratification from and the kinds of things you're good at and enjoy with respect to these other ancillary aspects of things. And so I think, really exploring that and asking yourself those questions and being really critical thinking about your own self is really important in that way.
Thank you. Dr. Govind?
I agree with everything Aurora said. And I would say one other thing. So one of the tricky things, coming out of a PhD is I would advise PhD students not to be afraid of taking on difficult problems. That teaches you a very deep skill. In fact, I can take this on and I can resolve it in some way. I mean, so that's important. Don't shy away from hard things at the end of the day. Right. And I think, the other thing, what I would say is with everything that we've been talking about, there is always a way back. If you spend some time in industry and there is a notion that you can never go back to academia or a national lab, I'm a good example of that. You can do that. It takes a lot of reading, like Dr. Kotecha says. If you ever want to see, okay, I want to change in my perspective, I want to change in my career, there is a way back. You have to work. You have to keep an eye open on various things. And you also, because in industry, you may not have access to all the journals that you might want to look at if you want to start an independent research career. So you have to sort of, go to a library or something, or try to see if there's a way you can actually get research articles, keep on top of the field you're working in, so that it gives you this option, right? No one is saying that you must do that, but it at least gives you an option saying, if I ever wanted to carve out an independent research career, then you're current. You can go in there and you can start thinking about writing a proposal, in fact. So I would say that's my 2 cents, and everything else Aurora already covered as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Keaveney, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I would reiterate all of that as well, and especially understanding that you have skills that are so broadly applicable. A PhD is not a degree that only teaches you this one specialization. It's a degree that teaches you how to look a way of looking at problems that is extremely useful in many different areas. In terms of like maybe some specific things that specific advice, if people are worried about will they like what they're doing and how will they move, or we didn't really get into when we got into soft skills, or we didn't get into sort of networking all that much, but some things, just being connected with all kinds of different people is going to teach you a lot of different ways of seeing things, and introduce you to a lot of different perspectives and people with different perspectives. So things like getting involved with review panels and things like that, so you can see how these processes work, and in different ways in different parts of the economy, and different agencies and things like that. That's like that would be extremely valuable. And not just review panels for funding opportunities, but like for further on, like facility reviews and that sort of project reviews and that sort of thing. That's one way of really learning a lot about how other people do things and how you can connect with them in, you know, in the case of you want to make a career change or something like that. So
Thank you, Dr. Kidney. Dr. Kotecha, do you want to bring us home?
Yes, I will try my best. So the question was what current PhD students or
I can repeat the question if you'd like
yeah,
me
yeah,
to.
yeah. No, I understand. So
Of
what
course.
recent PhD students, if they are unsure what they should do. So my suggestion was will be to take one step at a time. You don't have to plan out the whole life. What's your next option? What's our opportunities around you? Are you ready to move or not? So one step at a time. And there is no there is no success and failure. I would say these are all experiences. And if experience does not work out, you can always change and get into new experiences. So taking one step at a time and doing what looks like the best option will bring you home, whatever you are interested in spending your life.
Awesome. Well,
can I add to my answer?
of course.
Yes. I also wanted to iterate the importance of paying attention to your own needs and the workplace
Yes.
culture. This is, you know, you don't be miserable for
Yes.
you know, a job, you know, like it's much better not, you know, to be happy what you're doing. And you can do things different places and everything. So,
Yes.
and also career paths really only make sense in retrospect usually. So if people are worried about, I have to plan out my career and everything, that's not true. It usually doesn't work that way. So
Yes.
that's my only other piece of advice.
Maybe just to build upon that a little bit, and I think this has maybe been hinted at indirectly, but I think it's really important to say explicitly, is your identity is not necessarily your job, right? And so, you know, having flexibility in, you know, like with respect to your work environment, you know, maybe you're a faculty member, but maybe you're miserable. It's not worth it to live a life of misery, right? And so I think really figuring out, you know, what are the core things that you get gratification from, and finding that in whatever the best environment is possible is key. The name that's on there doesn't matter very much, right?
But at the same time, job is also very important part of life. So it's having a good balance, work and everything around is very important. So one step at a time, and you'll get there. Whatever you want to achieve in your life.
Yes, perfect answers from all around. We are about 3 minutes to the end of this webinar, so I would just like to take just a second to thank all of you for taking your time today, and for the participants for submitting questions. I saw that some were answered in the chat, and that was great. Thank you very much. Thank you again to all of the committee members who helped plan this. I was just a very small part. And thank you again, Dr. Robin Hayes, to be able to help us organize this today. And we get 2 minutes of our time back today, and have a nice afternoon, a nice lunch. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.